A young boy woke up one morning from his dad shaking him to his senses. Wake up, we've got to go." "Where are we going?" the boy asked. "I've got a surprise for you," his father said. "Your mom and your two sisters are already set to go. Hurry up." The boy groggily rose to his feet, got his clothes on, and headed out the door, ignoring the hunger pangs, longing for breakfast. His younger sisters began their journey that day riddled with anticipation. So when their dad began to unveil the surprise, they hung on every single word that he said. "Kids, there's this man from Nazareth, and he might be the prophet who came to save us from the oppression our people have been living under for so long, to save us from all the pain and hurt. He might be the one Moses and Daniel wrote about, the one to liberate us, to bring us back to our promised land, to get it back for us. He might be the one to save us." But the boy, when he started hearing this, he was still a little bit more skeptical. "Okay, sure, Dad. How do you know?" he asked, with an eye roll only a teenager can summon. "There's been signs," the dad confidently declared. "What signs, Daddy?" one of the girls wondered. "Well, honey, he heals the sick. I've seen it with my own eyes. A few months back, I heard some commotion and saw crowds surrounding a rabbi I'd never seen before. One of the guys from work told me that when he was in Jerusalem during Passover, he saw this guy named Jesus doing and saying things people just couldn't believe, and here he was actually in Galilee. Do you know the royal official who lives down the street, the one whose son got sick and almost died but then unexplainably recovered?" "Of course," the kids replied in unison. "Well, Jesus was the one who made that happen. He healed the boy. And today he's back in Galilee, and I want you to see him. I want you to experience what he can do for us." After their dad finished talking, it seemed like everyone's pace picked up significantly, even the boy. He became more and more intrigued as he thought about the words his dad said. And they also noticed more people joining them on their trip to the open field where they heard Jesus had last been seen. And when they arrived, they were joined by thousands of others just trying to get a glimpse of this miracle-working rabbi. As they stood there, the young boy's stomach reminded him of his missed meal earlier in the day. He was hungry. I mean, actually, everyone was starting to get hungry. It was lunchtime, and there were no restaurants or grocery stores within miles. And that's when it happened. One of the boy's friends from school had brought a lunch with him. 5 loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Not a lot. And so as Jesus and his disciples were talking and started looking at this other boy's meal, they asked for it, and he handed it over. Then they told everyone else to sit down, and then Jesus took the meal, gave thanks, and started passing out the food. The boy was a bit starstruck when Jesus himself came and handed him a meal, and as he devoured the food, finally breaking his fast, he noticed that everyone, thousands of people, were being fed from the little bit of bread and a little bit of fish his friend had handed over. There was actually so much food that there were leftovers. The boy, remembering what his dad said, thought, "Man, maybe he is the prophet we've heard about." And then after this theory crossed his mind, another idea crept in, something that dominated his thinking for the rest of his time near Jesus that day. I wonder what else he can give us. I wonder what else he can give us. You know, that sentence reminds me of my son. Anytime I come home from a trip, whether it's a trip to another country for work stuff or a trip somewhere with my friends, I always bring back a gift for Jericho, something to let him know I was thinking about him and that I missed him. The last trip I went on, though, I came back with a small postcard. He loves postcards for some reason, so I always grab him one. But I usually get him something else, too. It's not just like, here's a postcard, you're welcome. I usually bring him like a different gift that he can play with or experience and have fun with. But this time I didn't. Just the postcard. That's all he got. And how do you think Jericho responded? Well, I'll tell you, with such compassion, he said, "Thank you, Dad, for thinking of me and bringing something that brings me so much joy. I'm so grateful for your safe return home and for the Lord's protection and provision on your journey. Let us give thanks now to the Lord." Not even close. Like, that, he didn't even think of saying those things. Instead, after I handed him his postcard and nothing else, his brow furrowed and he said, "Dad, what else are you going to give me?" We had a good chat after that. But not one where I got angry, because I recognized that my son's response to me and the boy from the story's response that I shared earlier to Jesus is a response many have to God. Hey, what more can you give me? What do I get out of this? What can God do for me? Pastor Skye Jethani writes, religion is a means to an end, a more spiritual method of achieving our desires, whether they are the products of advertising or of nobler sources. Those who relate to God as the almighty provider hold a decidedly one-dimensional understanding of him. God gives and we receive. Now, there are many reasons why we develop this one-dimensional view of God. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But before we do, let's recognize that if we've ever fallen into this, and most of us have, but if we have, we aren't alone. Actually, as soon as Jesus, the Son of God, God himself, began to make himself known, people wondered the same thing about him. What can he do for me? What else can he do for me? Go ahead and turn your Bibles or Bible apps to John chapter 6, and this is where we're going to read the actual account written by the Apostle John of what happened on the grass that day as Jesus fed thousands from just a few pieces of food. John chapter 6, starting in verse 1, we read that Jesus crosses over to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, and then verse 2, a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Okay, why did they follow? Because they saw and heard what he had done. They experienced what Jesus was capable of. They saw what he could do, so they followed him. Verse 3. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. Now, this little tidbit that John shares right here is so important. Passover was an annual reminder that they needed another Moses, someone who could come along and deliver them, someone to throw the Romans off their promised land, to give them back what God gave them, someone to conquer and overcome and make their lives better. So you can begin to understand the anticipation of what Jesus could be for them, for the people in these stories that we read that are encountering and experiencing Jesus. That's why so many were coming to see him. Verse 5, when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? Now, no one was planning on feeding everyone lunch that day. Like, that wasn't in their itinerary. Like, people are going to show up and we're just going to make sure we feed them all. So when Jesus turned to Philip, who Philip was from that area and would have known where to get food and where they should have provided lunch and how to do that, and Jesus says, hey, where are we going to get enough bread for everybody? Philip kind of freaks out a little bit. Look at verse 7. Philip answered him, it would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one of these people, even to have a bite, just one bite. Just people to have one bite would be absurdly expensive, Jesus. And that's when another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, in case there was like 3 names there. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. And here's what he said. It's like, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? Andrew's like, hey, this kid's got food. Which I wish John would have written down the boy's response in this moment. Like, yeah, I've got food, but this is my lunch. Like, not your lunch, Andrew. Why don't you back away from my lunch? At least that would have been my reaction. But this boy was obviously a better human being than me because he gave his meal over to Jesus. We read this. We assume this from what we read next in verse 10. Jesus said, have the people sit down. And there was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Now, real quick, when we read 5,000, we have to understand that this is a number that was used to describe a Roman legion. Like an official Roman legion, you would say there's about 5,000. Some folks actually estimate that around 20,000 people were there that day. So John is saying Jesus has with him, the people that showed up to see him on the grass, an army. There was an army of people that Jesus was about to feed. Verse 11, Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, which I love the visual imagery there. Like, it would be like if I were at a conference of about 20,000 people and everyone started to get hungry and someone said, hey, I got a double-double from In-N-Out. and then I were to take that double-double and said, we're all going to share this. Like, we're going to have this double-double, and we're going to share it. So, Lord, let me just give thanks for this food. Thank you so much for this. People would be like, what are you doing? Like, we're not going to, that's gross. We're not all going to share that. That's not even going to get past the first row. Now, even still, after everything they had seen, the disciples see Jesus give thanks. And they had to have been like, what is he doing? Like, does he realize he's just got a couple loaves and some fish? Like, that's it. So why is he giving thanks for that? Well, yeah. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left. Of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. Now, real quick, this whole scene, what's going on here and what Jesus experienced, there's leftovers, there's food. This whole scene would have forced recollection of the stories of manna in the wilderness that they'd heard about their ancestors. Except as that story goes, their ancestors just had barely enough food to eat, just what they needed for the day. And here's Jesus giving everyone enough to have their fill, and then there's leftovers on top of that. Not only are they getting what they need, there's more than enough. So they had to have been wondering, who is this guy? Verse 14, after the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, and that word began is important. They began to say, surely this is the prophet who has come into the world. He's the one. He's the one Moses and Daniel spoke of. And for this brief moment, that's why I think John uses the word began. For this brief moment, people get it. They recognize who Jesus is. But it changes, it shifts. It doesn't stick with them, because in their recognition of Jesus, they quickly moved to what Jesus could do for them. Verse 15, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Remember, Jesus has an army with him, an army that he just fed. So if he wanted to take back what belonged to these people, he could have. He could have stormed the gates of Jerusalem. Word would have spread. If people heard that Jesus was marching toward Jerusalem and there was 20,000 people with him, people would have been like, I'm joining that because he's going to get us our land back. They wouldn't have been able to stop Jesus from conquering. But that's what they missed. Jesus wasn't here to take anything by force. I mean, later on, he actually would enter the gates of Jerusalem, but not to conquer with strength, but to be crucified in surrender. Something that would mean more for more than just them. Something significant, earth-shaking, eternity-shifting for all people in every nation throughout every generation. But they didn't get that. And Jesus knew they didn't get that. Their affection and love and honor toward him didn't have to do so much with who he was as much as what it meant that he could do for them. They wanted what Jesus could potentially give them right now. They understood who Jesus was for a moment, but their thoughts and their appetites quickly went back to what it meant for them. So Jesus withdrew by himself, which confused all of them. What happened to Jesus? So the next day, skip ahead to verse 25. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? Which is such like a weird question. Jesus knew that's not what they were really asking. Like, oh my gosh, when did you show up here? What they really cared about, what they really wanted to know is like, Jesus, what else are you going to do for us? Look at verse 26. Jesus answered, very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Do not work for food that spoils. He's like, you guys are here for the food. You came for lunch. You thought that miracle was the point. It's not. I'm the point. So don't work for food that spoils. Don't work for just what you can taste and satisfy your appetite. But instead, work for food that endures to eternal life. which the Son of Man will give you, for on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Don't you recognize who I am? Don't you see me? And then they asked him, okay, what must we do to do the works God requires? And Jesus said, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. Again, guys, don't miss me. I don't know how Jesus stayed so patient in so many of these encounters we read throughout the Gospels. I mean, he's doing everything he can to show them that they can be part of something way bigger and way better than retaking a piece of land or restoring their rights or lunch. Don't miss me. Don't miss who I am, because Jesus, allegiance to Jesus, following Jesus is way bigger than them getting their country back, their lifestyles back, their preferences back, and their rights or what they think they deserve back. And here Jesus is literally standing in front of them, telling them this, and still all they can think about is lunch. Look at verse 30. So they asked him, what sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? Like, if we're supposed to believe in you, aren't you going to do something cool for us to believe in you? I mean, remember, verse 31, our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. They're essentially saying, yeah, we get it. We're supposed to believe in you. That's great. But can you run lunch back again? Like, that was cool. And it's so interesting that they bring up manna in the wilderness. Because when God sent manna to their ancestors, there were no leftovers like there was on the grass that day. He gave them exactly what they needed. And here's Jesus standing in front of them as they refer to God providing what their ancestors needed, and they miss that their experience is no different. God sent them exactly what they needed that day, except it wasn't lunch. It was Jesus. He's all they needed. What about us? Do we understand what we need? Or are we just in this for lunch, for the food, for what else God can do for us, for what else the church can do for us? I mean, how many people have left the church or abandoned their relationship with God because they weren't getting enough out of it? Like, God, what did you bring me? What do you have for me? Why didn't you give me this? Why didn't you do that? You see, it's impossible to have an authentic and intimate relationship with someone you're always trying to get something from. And our relationship with God is no different. But so often you, still have this one-dimensional view of God. He's going to give me what I want. I'm going to get a lot out of God. If I follow God and do the things that he says, he's going to do this for me, for my family, for my country, because he can, and I believe that he will. So my time in, my devotion and obedience to will benefit me greatly in tangible ways right now. That's a good friend of mine to kind of process with me the direction that I felt like we needed to go for this sermon. And she sent me something afterward after she just read the last paragraph I just said, and she said it really had her processing some stuff. And I just want to tell you what she said about our propensity to view God for what he can do for us. And here's what she said. For me, this is true and not always obvious. I don't usually realize I've been pursuing God in order to get something from him until I don't get it. That brings clarity right away. I was in it for healing. I was hoping for a baby. I wanted my depression to go away. And what happens when it doesn't come? When your body fails, when sickness rages and your healing is slow or non-existent, or your depression is seasonal? If my time and my devotion to God are directly tied to the things I hope for going my way, then when terrible things happen, my devotion to him falls with it. It messes with my ability to trust that he is good, and I live in this up and down emotional roller coaster of trying to figure out what I should even hope for. And then she said this, and I think this is so profound and something that we should all look at this week. I think a great exercise for all of us would be to look at what God has and has not promised us, because God with us, Emmanuel, is a promise. But God doing miracles on command, that's not a promise. You know, what she shared with me made me process a lot and think through things and even realize that while God still may provide for us the way we want, that's not our end game with God. If that's our end game with God, we've completely and entirely missed Jesus. Just like the folks on the grass that day. The people who wanted their appetites met, who approached Jesus like consumers. And this same problem they had is a problem in us as well. Consumerism is a glaring issue within the church because it is a glaring issue in all of us. This is one of the many areas that followers of Jesus today have allowed culture to infiltrate and dictate their relationship with God and the church. We, the church, have been driven to consumerism because we voluntarily submitted to the false gospel of materialism. For decades, we have attempted to make sure that people in the church are comfortable, that their needs are met, and they get what they want through the church, which is a direct reflection of culture. And they're not inherently bad things. But when it's just so that people show up and enjoy themselves and come back, we have completely missed the mark. And it's a reflection of culture. I mean, the average American home includes more than 300,000 individual items. We average 103 individual items per person in our closet, but only wear 20% of our wardrobe. You probably know that if you've seen me preach before, because I'm sure I've worn this shirt 7 out of the last 10 times. Americans collectively spend $1.2 trillion on non-essential goods. One of the fastest growing real estate markets in the past 40 years have been rental storage units, even though on average our homes are 1,000 square feet bigger than they were in 1973. My 9-year-old probably has about 600 toys and only plays with 6 of them. And only God knows how many postcards are stuffed in random places in our house. I don't think he actually likes them. But no, we're not materialistic, are we? Like, we don't have this desire for things. In his book, Pursuit of God, A.W. Tozer writes, "There is within the human heart a tough, fibrous root of fallen life whose nature is to possess, always to possess. It covets things with a deep and fierce passion." And when we covet things, the value of having God in our lives is predicated on how well he fulfills our needs and gives us our things in whatever we feel we deserve. And then consequently, how well the bride of Christ, the church, fulfills our needs. And if they don't do a good job, I'm going to go somewhere else. If they do a good job for now, I'll give them a pass. And it's such a bummer that we approach Jesus this way. Like, hey, Jesus, that was cool what you did yesterday, but how about lunch today? And toward the end of his book, the Apostle John writes, "Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book." There's so many signs, I didn't even write about all of them. "But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." See, the signs aren't there to just show us what Jesus did and like, man, that's crazy that he did those miracles and healed those people. That's not the goal. The goal is to point us to who Jesus is. The question that changes everything, the question that Jesus is trying to provide the answer for and point people to throughout the Gospels is, who do you believe that I am? Do you think I'm a magic rabbi, conqueror of land, provider of food? Or do you believe that I am God, the Lord of all, the one who gave himself? If our understanding of Jesus is Lord, is God, then we stop asking for what he can give us and start participating, start giving, start serving from what he already did give, himself. Because in him, we already have everything we need. If we are to be people that are on mission, our goal is to push away from consumerism and move toward Jesus, following the one that all the signs point to. Because consumers say, feed me. Followers, though, know they've already been fed. Consumers are concerned with the supply. Followers focus on the supplier. Consumers wonder what else God can give them. Followers wonder what else they can give God. Consumers say, this is mine. Followers say, I am yours. Consumers come with lists of criticisms, demands, and personal preferences. Followers come with generosity, humility, and service. Let's be followers. Let's follow Jesus. Let's deny ourselves. Let's take on a posture of surrender and begin with a servant-minded heart. And I hope and pray that this would be indicative of how we approach the church, the family of believers as well. Actually, to take it one step further, I hope this same attitude is apparent in us toward all the people Jesus is attempting to reveal himself to. Which, remember, that doesn't exclude anyone. That every person in every nation throughout every generation would see our servant-minded heart, our generosity, our service, our compassion, our humility, our love, because we are following Jesus, not wondering what more he can give us. Let's pray. Father God, I'm so grateful for what you gave, and I'm sorry for the moments that I look past what you gave. I'm sorry, God, for the moments for me specifically that I know that what you gave, when you gave yourself, it's not enough for me. God, crucify that in me. Draw that out of me and delete it, eliminate it from my life, God, because I know here and here, God, in my head and my heart, that you're enough. So God, let that be what my life reflects. And let that be true for all of us, God. That we wouldn't just try to consume you and try to figure out exactly what else you can give us, and we just consume the things that you can provide, God. But our view of you is way bigger than a one-dimensional view, God, that we look at you and understand that you are above all, in all, and through all, and that we, as your followers, are surrendered to you. Father, let that be true of each of us. Go with us this week and throughout our lives as we try to imitate you, as we follow you, and represent you well to the people we come across. We love you and pray this in your Son's matchless, beautiful, powerful name. Amen.